everyone. Welcome to lesson 29. This lesson will talk about arrays, so it's an introduction to arrays. I highly suggest, you watch the review videos as well so that these concepts sink in and they stick, okay? I need you to understand them. All right, so typically we always start our programs with our name, program description, and the date. And we have our header files here. We have IOStream because I am using CIN and Cout. And we have IOmanip because I'm also using fix and show point and all those kind of things. So I'm manipulating the output. All right, so let's talk about what is an array. An array is a data structure that contains a contiguous, that means side by side or sitting close together, a contiguous group of elements. Typically, these elements are all the same data type, such as an integer, a double, or a string. They are commonly used in computer programs to organize data so that a related set of values can be easily sorted or searched while using only one variable. Here's an example. A search engine may use an array to store web pages found in a search that a user performed. You could use a different variable for each result, but an array is a lot more efficient way to manage that memory. All right, so you could make up your own variable for every result, but arrays are a lot faster and a lot easier to manage that because you just use one variable and number them. Arrays are a pass-by-reference function by default. We do not need to return values in an array. We do not use the and or the ampersand in the function parameter list for arrays. It's a given. If you're using an array, it assumes that it's a pass-by reference. All right, so let's look at function main. Here's function main, and we have int main in a little curly brace, and then integer test5. So here we are declaring our array. It's an integer array. It has 5 elements. This is a declaration of a variable called sum, and we're initializing it to 0. This is a declaration of a variable called average, and this is a declaration of a variable called index. Now this is an integer, and this one is a double. Okay. Now we have Cout, fixed, show point, set precision. Well, I'm dealing with grades, test grades, so I want to make sure I at least count over 2 decimal places to be able to average scores up because we're going to be getting averages. And I also want to show point so I can see those decimal values. And of course the decimal point is fixed. You learned this earlier, right? Cout, on the screen it will say enter 5 test scores, hit enter after each. Okay, we're giving the user some instructions on how to enter their test scores. Now, here's our loop to help manage our array. For index equals 0, so we're starting our index at 0. If you watch those Chapter 8 review videos, you would know that arrays start with position 0, not with position 1. So they start with 0, and then we're going to count up to less than 5, because if we counted up to 5, that would be 6 values, right? Because we count 0. So we'd have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. That'd be 6 elements. So we only need 5 elements. We said we only want 5 elements in our array. So as long as it's less than 5, we could also put equal to 4 here, right? That would work. All right, so then index plus plus, that means we add 1 to index every time we go through our loop. And once this is false, the loop will stop. Then in our loop, we say Cout, enter test score number, and then here's the index plus 1 because I want it to say enter test score number 1 for the first item. If I just say index, it'll put a 0 here, so it'd say enter test scores number 0. That doesn't make sense to a user, so I just added 1 so it would count by starting with 1 instead of starting with 0 for this output to the screen. Okay, just for this output to the screen. All right, so it'll say enter test score number 1 the first time through. Then I put a little hyphen here so that when the user actually types in a value, they'll have this little space, hyphen space, and then they type in their value. So they say 95. So 95 would be assigned to test 0. So the variable is test and the index is 0. And then that value, whatever whatever the user typed in our case I said 95, it would be added to sum. Then it goes through the loop and the user will type in the next test score and it will be added to sum. And then of course index was added 1 to it, so it was index was 1 in this case. When it goes through the loop again, index will be 2 and added to sum, and then it goes through the loop again, index is 3 and that is added to sum until we have all 5 test scores added to sum, and now we have a large sum, right, of all those values. Then you'll exit that loop, and now we take and divide sum by 5 because we had 5 test scores and we get an average. And then if you look down here, we see out the average of the test scores equals, and it prints out the average. But I have another loop, and I say if a particular test, like test 0, we'll start with 0, is less than average, then I want it to see out that score is less than the average test score. And if it's not, they won't print anything out. So let's run this real quick so you can see how it operates. I'm going to build, and then I'm going to run it. There we go. All right, enter test score 1. I'm going to say 95. Test score 2, 88. Test score 3, 78. Test score 4, 92. And test score 5, 85. All right, so here's the average of all those test scores, 87.6. 78 is less than the average test score, and that's one of them. And 85 is less than the average. So our program worked, okay? So you can see how you can use those indices to represent individual values, and depending on what that index is, that's assigned to a specific value, okay? Now let's keep going. If the index of the array is negative or greater than the actual array size, it is said to be out of bounds. Remember to count position 0 as an element of the array, because that can confuse you when you start creating your arrays. Some compilers will give an error message, some will not. So you cannot count on that, okay? So you have to know, make sure you don't have arrays that are out of bounds. You do not have to list all the elements of the array when you initialize it, but be careful, as the remaining elements will automatically be initialized to 0. And we're going to talk about what's below now. Okay, so I went up to the top of the program and commented out the part we've already done, so when I run this, you will see just this part of this program, okay? So I read this part to you just a second ago. So now I'm going to talk about static arrays, and then in a minute we'll talk about the page number idea. So static arrays means that you assign a value to an indexed variable and it doesn't change. So in this case, I'm assigning this string value, Bruce Wayne is very rich, that string value, to name 0. And then Bruce Banner is very angry would be assigned to name 1. And then Clark Kent is very strong is assigned to name 3. So right here, I'm just going to print on the screen each one of those in the order that they are assigned. Now I could change this order up, couldn't I, and rearrange them, and that would be okay. That it would change the order that they're put to the screen. So let's just run that real quick so you can see. All right, here it is. Bruce Wayne is very rich, Bruce Banner is very angry, and Clark Kent is very strong. Okay, so it ran like we expected. All right, so if I wanted to switch the order, I could make this a 2 And I could make this a 0, right? And that would put it backwards. So Clark Kent would be done first. So let's build it real quick. And then let's run it. And there it is. Clark Kent is first. Clark Kent is very strong. Bruce Banner is angry. Bruce Wayne is very rich. Was last because I put the 0 position last. Okay? All right. So let's talk a little bit about string names. This one I'm declaring an array called name. It has 10 elements. So the statement above declares my array variable name. It can store up to 10 values. An array is a variable that can store multiple values at the same time by using an index value. It works like a book. A book has a name, pages, and page numbers, and content on each page. When I read in a name from a file, it will be stored on the current value of the index. The blank page is that location, and using the variable name plus an index number for the blank page. When the for loop increments, a new blank page is used to store the next array value, creating a list of values. Once I have the values stored within my array, so once I get them all stored on each page of my book, I can do various things with those values. One of the limitations with arrays is that we may not always have a good way of determining the array's length, because sometimes you're not real sure how many entries that the user has. So you have to figure out ways to figure that out, right? All right, so that is the end of lesson 29, and I hope you watch lesson 30.